The sound was a sharp, arrogant scratch. Gregory Shaw, his $3,000 Brioni tie a perfect dim knot, signed the divorce papers with a flourish. He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound that filled the sterile 50th floor conference room at his law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Serafina," he sneered, pushing the papers across the mahogany table. He believed he had won. He believed she was ruined. He had no idea that waiting for her downstairs wasn't a taxi, but a $4 million pearl-white Koenigsegg. And the man holding the door was worth more than his entire firm. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the view of Central Park into a gray, weeping watercolor. Inside the conference room, the air was thick with the scent of old money leather and palpable disdain. Gregory Shaw looked every inch the man who ruled this particular universe. His suit was custom-made, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his expression one of bored triumph. Across from him sat his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife Serafina. To Gregory she looked small, faded. She wore a simple beige sheath dress that he found particularly drab. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face, which he once found beautiful, was pale and impassive. She was accompanied by a lawyer, a mousy woman named Ms. Chen, whom Greg's own shark, Arthur Klein, had run circles around for weeks. "Gregory, if you've signed, then we just need Serafina's signature," Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk. Greg leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Of course, let's get this over with. I have a 2 o'clock tea time at Winged Foot, assuming the rain lets up." He watched as Serafina picked up the pen. He had won. He had won completely. The penthouse on Park Avenue, the Hamptons estate, the art collection, all of it remained his. Serafina, who had come into this marriage with nothing, would leave with what he'd generously offered, a one-time lump sum payment that to him was little more than taxi money. It was in his mind a masterful victory. He'd spent the last year building a case that she was unstable, depressed, and incapable of managing her own affairs, let alone any significant portion of his assets. His affair with Tiffany, a bright-eyed and ambitious paralegal from his own office, was quietly swept under the rug as a symptom of a broken marriage. He felt a bubble of laughter rise in his chest again. Serafina. She was pretty once, but she was soft. She had no iron in her. She'd been a quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs when they met, a job he found cute but ultimately pointless. He had convinced her to quit to support his career. His rise to senior partner at one of the most powerful law firms in the world was proof that he'd made the right choice. She'd become the perfect hostess, the perfect accessory. And now that accessory was worn out. "Sarah, darling," he said, using the pet name he knew she hated, "do try and be smart with that. It's more money than your little family in Arizona has ever seen. Maybe you can get a nice studio in, I don't know, Queens?" Arthur Klein winced slightly. It was unnecessarily cruel. Ms. Chen's head snapped up, a flash of anger in her eyes. Serafina, however, did not react. Her hand was perfectly steady. She signed the name she hadn't used in 15 years, Serafina Navarro. She capped the pen, placing it precisely parallel to the folder. "We're done then," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. It was flat, clear, and cold. "Indeed," Greg scoffed. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Serafina." She stood. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. You were wonderful." "Ms. Navarro," the mousy lawyer replied, a small, strange smile playing on her lips. "The pleasure was all mine." Serafina turned and walked out of the conference room. She didn't look back. Greg let out a sigh of relief. "Well, Arthur, that's that. Send me the bill." He felt a sudden childish urge to see her final pathetic exit. He wanted to watch her shuffle out of the grand lobby, to see her hail a cab in the rain. That final image would be the perfect end to his victory. "I'll be right back," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "Just want to make sure she finds the right door." He followed her, striding quickly down the plush carpeted hallway, past the reception desk with its enormous floral arrangement. He caught her just as the elevator doors were closing. He didn't get in. He just watched her face blank and serene as the polished brass doors slid shut. He took the next elevator down, a smug smile on his face. He stepped out into the cavernous marble and glass lobby of the GM building. The doorman, a man named Patrick, whom Greg had never bothered to learn the name of, was rushing to the curb. Greg stepped out from under the awning, feeling the cold mist on his face. He looked left toward the taxi stand. No Serafina. He looked right, and his world stopped. Parked directly in front of the building in the no-standing zone that not even Greg Shaw dared to use was a car that didn't seem real. It was a pearl-white Koenigsegg Gemera, a $4 million four-seater megacar. Its dihedral synchro-helix doors were lifting up and outward like the wings of some futuristic bird. And holding one of them open was a man. He was tall, dressed not in a suit but in a simple dark cashmere hoodie and jeans that Greg instinctively knew cost more than his entire outfit. The man's profile was sharp, intense, and globally recognizable. It was Henry Alistair Rousseau, the reclusive French-American tech mogul, the man whose company Rousseau Energetics was single-handedly remaking the global power grid. A man worth not millions but billions. A man who, as Greg knew with a sickening jolt, was the single largest client of Sullivan & Cromwell's Mergers and Acquisitions Department. Greg watched frozen as Serafina walked calmly to the car. Henry Rousseau smiled at her, a genuine warm smile. He didn't just hold the door. He touched her elbow, guiding her in with a tenderness that made Greg's stomach clench. "Sarah," Rousseau's voice carried clear and concise. "Is it done?" "It's done," Serafina replied, sliding into the supple leather seat. "Good," Rousseau said. "The jet's waiting at Teterboro. We're late for the Zurich meeting." Greg stumbled forward, his briefcase slipping from his numb fingers and hitting the wet pavement with a slap. "Sarah!" He said her name, but it came out as a strangled croak. Serafina paused. She looked at him. Through the open window, her face was no longer a blank mask. A slow, brilliant, devastating smile spread across her features. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. "Goodbye, Gregory," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Thank you for the taxi money." The door shut with a silent, pressurized thunk. The hybrid engine, which had been silent, let out a low, predatory growl. The car pulled seamlessly into the Fifth Avenue traffic, disappearing in a spray of gray mist. Gregory Shaw stood on the sidewalk, his $5,000 suit soaking his mouth open. His lawyer, Arthur Klein, came up behind him holding an umbrella. "Mr. Shaw, sir. Are you... all right. Did you see that? That was Henry Rousseau." Greg couldn't speak. He just pointed his hand, trembling. Arthur looked at the departing car, then at his client's white, shocked face. He cleared his throat, a sudden, terrible understanding dawning. "Oh," Arthur said softly. "Oh, dear." To understand the depth of Serafina's escape, you had to understand the construction of her prison. It wasn't built of iron bars, but of whispered insults, social obligations, and calculated isolation. 15 years ago, Serafina Navarro was a name whispered with a kind of awe in the analyst pits at Goldman Sachs. She was a quant prodigy from Tucson, a University of Chicago graduate with a mind that saw numbers not as figures, but as a language. Her predictive models on emerging markets were becoming the stuff of legend. She was quiet and tense, and on the fast track to a partnership. Gregory Shaw was an ambitious, charismatic senior associate at Sullivan & Cromwell, the law firm that handled Goldman's biggest accounts. He saw her at a dreary interfirm networking event. She was in a corner sketching an algorithm on a cocktail napkin. He was intrigued by her beauty, but he was captivated by her brilliance. Or so he said. The truth Serafina later realized was that her brilliance threatened him. Their courtship was a whirlwind. He was worldly charming and persuasive. He painted a picture of a life she'd never imagined. "Sarah, you're wasting that brain on derivatives," he'd murmur over dinner at Balthazar. "I'm going to be a senior partner. I need someone smart by my side, not just a wife, a partner. We can build an empire. You won't have to work. You'll have a life." She fell for it. She was tired of the 100-hour work weeks. She was in love. She quit her job. They married. The first 5 years were a blur of his success. He made partner. They moved into the Park Avenue penthouse. They bought the Sagaponack estate in the Hamptons. Serafina, true to her nature, threw herself into this new role. She managed their finances, oversaw the renovations, and learned the complex, unspoken rules of New York's old money society. But the partner he promised her was a lie. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a high-functioning, beautiful piece of decoration. The dehumanization was subtle at first. "Darling, let's not bore our guests with your thoughts on the energy market," he'd say at a dinner party, cutting her off with a genial smile. "Why don't you tell them about the hydrangeas in the Hamptons?" "Serafina, that's Rothko, not Rauschenberg," he'd correct her loudly at a museum gala. "It's so endearing how you get them mixed up. Don't embarrass yourself." "What would you know about leverage buyouts, sweetie?" he'd ask when she tried to discuss his work. "Just make sure the catering for the fundraiser is perfect. That's your department." He systematically cut her off from her old life. Her friends from Goldman were boring and grubby. Her family in Arizona was unrefined. He gave her a generous allowance for the house and her clothes paid from a joint account he monitored daily. She was in effect trapped. She hadn't earned her own salary in a decade. She was surrounded by wealth but owned nothing. She was Mrs. Gregory Shaw, an asset. And in his eyes she was depreciating. He had grown bored of her quiet intelligence and yearned for someone who, like his new paralegal, Tiffany, was young, adoring, and uncomplicated. Someone who looked at him like he was a god, not like he was a math problem she'd already solved. Serafina wasn't depressed, as he'd told his lawyers. She was dormant. She was a volcano covered in snow waiting. She had poured all her frustrated, restless energy into managing his life, his homes, and his social calendar with the same ruthless efficiency she'd once applied to the stock market. She knew where every dollar was. She knew his passwords. She knew his secrets. She knew, for instance, that his genius legal strategies were often built on insecure bluster. She knew his rock-solid portfolio was dangerously over-leveraged in volatile markets. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her that he would never let her go if he thought she was anything but broken. He would fight not because he loved her, but because his narcissism couldn't stand the idea of her leaving and succeeding. He had to be the one to discard her. So for 2 years, Serafina began to fade. She stopped offering opinions. She forgot names at parties. She dressed in the bland beige colors he preferred. She let him believe she was crumbling under the pressure of his world. She let him believe she was a casualty. She was, in fact, building a weapon. The breaking point wasn't the discovery of his affair with Tiffany. Serafina had known about that for 6 months. She'd found the Chase Sapphire credit card statement for a business trip to St. Bart's that she knew she hadn't planned. It was a cliché, and frankly, it bored her. The catalyst, the moment the dormant volcano decided to erupt, happened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the annual Patrons Gala, the second biggest event of the year after the Met Gala. This year, Serafina had been the co-chair of the organizing committee. It was her project. She had spent a year navigating the treacherous waters of New York's wealthiest egos, securing donations and planning an event that was by all accounts flawless. Her greatest coup was securing a massive last-minute anonymous donation of $5 million. It had saved the new Egyptian wing expansion. Gregory, of course, was taking all the credit. "My wife is the face, but I do the heavy lifting," he'd boomed to a reporter from the New York Times. "You have to know which arms to twist. I got on the phone with a few key clients and, well, the results speak for themselves." Serafina stood beside him, her smile as fixed as the diamonds on her neck. Later that evening, a Page Six style reporter, a notoriously sharp man named Bryce Vinter, cornered Serafina by the Temple of Dender. "Mrs. Shaw, you look stunning," he gushed. "Everyone's saying you pulled this gala from the brink. What's your secret?" Before Serafina could answer, Greg materialized, placing a heavy, possessive hand on her waist. Oh, Sarah, she's the secret weapon. He laughed, his voice just a little too loud. She tastes all the canapes to make sure they're perfect. Isn't that right, sweetie? He winked at the reporter. She's got a real talent for domestic things. Bryce Venter's smile tightened. He knew an insult when he heard one. Seraphina's face did not change. If you'll excuse us, she said, extricating herself from Greg's grip. I need to check on the dessert course. The ride home in the back of their chauffeured Bentley was silent. The silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. As they stepped into their penthouse, Greg loosened his tie. God, these things are a bore, but I think we cemented the donation for my new corner office. Sullivan was impressed. You humiliated me, Greg, Seraphina said, her voice quiet. He stopped, genuinely surprised. What? By giving you credit for the food, darling. It was a joke. You're so sensitive. You used to have a sense of humor. You took credit for my work. That $5 million donation. You had nothing to do with it. Greg's face hardened. He dropped the charming facade. And what if I did? Who do you think allows you to play party planner with the richest people in the world? Who pays for the dress on your back? It's my name, my reputation. We are a team, Seraphina, and I am the captain. You seem to be forgetting that. I am not on your team, Greg. I am on your payroll, and you've just reminded me how little you pay. He stared at her, his eyes cold. This was new. This was not the broken, faded woman he'd been carefully curating. What's gotten into you? He sneered. Is it because I've been spending time with Tiffany? He wanted a reaction. He wanted tears. He wanted her to beg. Seraphina just looked at him. Tiffany is a symptom, Greg. You are the disease. He slapped her. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was the first time he'd ever laid a hand on her. It was a sharp, stinging crack that echoed in the vast, silent apartment. Seraphina didn't flinch. She just raised a hand to her cheek. She felt the sting, but beneath it she felt a profound, clarifying cold. Thank you, she said. What? He stammered, taken aback. Thank you for making this easy. She turned and walked to the guest room. She locked the door. The slap was the final period on a sentence she had been writing for 2 years. Greg, enraged and confused, went to his study. He poured a Macallan 25. He was furious. How dare she? He needed to put her back in her box. He remembered something Tiffany had mentioned. He went to Seraphina's desk, a delicate antique piece he'd bought her where her laptop sat. It was the one she used for household accounts and garden club emails. He opened it. He'd had Tiffany, who was clever with computers, install a keylogger on it months ago. He wanted to see if she was talking to a divorce lawyer. He pulled up the records. He scrolled past emails to caterers online shopping at Bergdorf's seating charts for the gala. Then he stopped. He saw her browser history. It wasn't self-help sites. It was a string of encrypted forums. It was sites about quantum computing, seed funding, and AI heuristics. He saw file transfers to a secure server in Switzerland. He saw references to something called the Phoenix Protocol. He didn't understand 90% of what he was looking at, but he understood that it was complex. It was secret. He felt a cold spike of fear. Not fear for her, but fear of her. This was the woman he'd been calling stupid. He marched back to the guest room and banged on the door. Seraphina, open this door. What is Phoenix Protocol? What the hell have you been doing on that laptop? There was no answer. He heard the faint, rapid click, click, click of typing from inside. He banged again, harder. Seraphina, you are my wife. You don't get to have secrets from me. The typing stopped. Her voice came muffled but clear from the other side of the door. You're right, Greg, I don't. That's why I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. My lawyer will be in touch. He was stunned. Her lawyer. She was filing. You can't, he yelled. You have nothing. I will ruin you. I will cut you off without a cent. You'll be back in that desert dump in a month. The line he'd been feeding himself for years. The reply from behind the door was the last thing he ever expected. Gregory, she said. "What?" he spat. "Shut up." For 2 years, Serafina's household laptop had been her covert operations center. While Greg was at the office, and later while he was working late with Tiffany, Serafina was not managing their social lives. She was reclaiming her own. It started as a game, a way to keep her mind sharp. She'd begun playing with market algorithms again just to see if she still could. Using a VPN encrypted servers and the anonymous handle S. Navarro, she started posting some of her predictive models on high-level invite-only tech and finance forums. Her models weren't just good, they were revolutionary. She wasn't just using standard market data. She was a quant, and she saw patterns everywhere. She built an algorithm that cross-referenced global shipping manifests, satellite-tracked weather patterns, and social media sentiment analysis to predict commodity futures with 98% accuracy. She called it the Phoenix Protocol, an algorithm that could predict the rebirth of an asset from what appeared to be its ashes. It was in essence a digital version of herself. Her handle, S. Navarro, became an underground legend. Small cutting-edge tech firms and boutique hedge funds began contacting her, offering consulting fees for her insights. At first she was terrified. Greg monitored their finances, but she was meticulous. She established a shell corporation in Delaware, Navarro Systems, using her long-expired passport and her parents' address in Tucson. The payments were routed through a Swiss bank account, the same one she'd used her household allowance to open, citing a surprise European vacation for Greg that never materialized. The money piled up, first thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The $5 million donation to the Met, that was her. She'd liquidated the profits from her first major algorithm test, a perfectly timed short sell on a coffee bean conglomerate she'd predicted would fail, and donated it. It was a test. Could she move that much money without Greg noticing? He hadn't. He'd just assumed it was one of his clients and had taken the credit. That was the moment she knew her plan would work. After the slap, the Phoenix Protocol went from a secret project to an exit strategy. She knew Greg's playbook. He would try to paint her as unstable, vindictive, and stupid. He would use her depression against her. He would use his high-powered lawyers to bury her emotions and drain her of money she didn't have. So she let him. She hired Ms. Chen, a brilliant lawyer from a small, unassuming firm. Ms. Chen wasn't a high-finance divorce shark. Her specialty was intellectual property law. Greg and Arthur Klein saw her as a pathetic pro bono-level lightweight. They never bothered to check her background. They assumed Serafina had hired her because she was cheap. They were right. Ms. Chen was cheap. In fact, she was working for free. She was an old classmate of Serafina's from the University of Chicago, and she was doing it for the sheer, unadulterated pleasure of seeing Serafina win. The entire divorce negotiation was a performance. "My client is distraught," Ms. Chen would say, her voice trembling with manufactured weakness. She is not well. She is not. She just wants this to be over. She is terrified of Mr. Shaw, she'd whisper in a sidebar with the mediator. She will agree to almost anything to be free. Greg and Arthur Klein lapped it up. They were sharks who smelled blood. They offered the paltry, insulting lump sum. "Ms. Navarro accepts," Ms. Chen had replied, looking down at her hands. Greg had laughed. He couldn't believe how easy it was. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, so convinced of Serafina's weakness, that he never once did a proper asset search on her. Why would he? She was just a housewife. He never looked for Navarro Systems. He never looked for the Swiss bank account. He never looked for the portfolio of patents for predictive AI already filed and approved. He was too busy celebrating his win. He was too busy laughing. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't a man. It was an opportunity. And that opportunity had a name: Henry Alastair Rousseau. Rousseau was a different breed of predator from Greg. He wasn't a lawyer who puffed his chest. He was a quiet, restless visionary who consumed data the way other people breathed air. He'd made his first billion in renewable energy technology, Rousseau Energetics, by the age of 30, and his current obsession was predictive AI. Specifically, he was obsessed with finding the mind behind S. Navarro. The algorithms S. Navarro was posting on encrypted forums were not just for the stock market. They were solving complex logistical problems. S. Navarro had in one post anonymously solved an energy distribution problem that Rousseau's own team of PhDs from MIT and Caltech had been stuck on for 8 months. Rousseau, a man who trusted code more than people, put his best cybersecurity team on it. "Find S. Navarro," he'd ordered. "I don't care what it costs. I want to hire them." It took his team 3 months. They tracked the digital footprint, peeling back layers of encryption and VPNs. Finally, they hit a wall. The IP address. It wasn't a tech hub in Silicon Valley or a university in Beijing. It was a private residential IP address registered to a penthouse on Park Avenue, an apartment belonging to a Mr. Gregory Shaw. Rousseau was confused. He knew of Gregory Shaw. He was the blowhard lawyer his firm Sullivan and Cromwell sometimes forced him to deal with. He despised him. But the data didn't lie. Rousseau arranged a meeting, a private dinner at Per Se. The pretense was a potential merger his firm was considering. Greg, smelling billable hours and a chance to impress a titan, was ecstatic. "And bring your wife," Rousseau's assistant had added. "Mr. Rousseau finds formal dinners so dull." Greg thought it was a charming quirk. He insisted Serafina come. "Wear the blue dress, Sarah, and try to look interested." The dinner was a disaster from Greg's perspective. Rousseau wasn't talking about mergers. He was talking about quantum entanglement and decoherence rates. Greg was completely lost. He blustered, trying to steer the conversation. "Well, Henry, in terms of the law, the regulatory hurdles for this kind of tech are—" Rousseau ignored him, his piercing gray eyes fixed on Serafina, who had been silent all night. "Your husband, Mrs. Shaw. He is S. Navarro." Greg laughed. What is that, a new scotch?" Serafina set her wine glass down. She looked at Henry Rousseau. Her mind was racing. This was it, the end game. "No," Serafina said, her voice quiet but firm. "He isn't." Greg was about to make another joke when Serafina continued, speaking directly to Rousseau. "And you're miscalculating the decoherence rate. Your model assumes a static environment. You need to account for quantum jitter in your matrix. Your algorithm is collapsing because it's too rigid." The table went silent. Greg's face went purple. "Serafina, be quiet. You don't know what you're—" Henry Rousseau held up a hand, silencing Greg without even looking at him. He was staring at Serafina with an expression of profound electric shock. "Jitter," Rousseau repeated. "Of course. It's the micro-fluctuations. How would you stabilize it?" "You don't," Serafina said. "You integrate the jitter. You use it as a random variable to strengthen the prediction, not fight it. It's what I call the Phoenix Protocol." Henry Alistair Rousseau stared at her for a full 10 seconds. Then he started to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of scorn like Greg's. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated delight. "Mrs. Shaw," he said finally, "you are S. Navarro." "Yes," she said. "I have been trying to find you for 6 months. I was going to offer you a $10 million signing bonus and a blank check for your own research division." Greg, who had been listening to this exchange as if it were in a foreign language, finally processed the number. $10 million, Sarah. What is he? But Henry continued, his eyes never leaving Serafina's. "I see now that a job is not what you need." He looked at Greg, his gaze turning to ice. "Mr. Shaw, I believe you are in the wrong meeting. You may leave." What? This is my client," Greg sputtered. "You're fired," Rousseau said simply. "As of this moment, Sullivan and Cromwell no longer represents any part of my organization. Security will see you out." Greg was speechless. 2 of the restaurant's security staff were suddenly at his elbow. He was escorted out, protesting the entire way. Henry Rousseau turned back to Serafina. He poured her a glass of water. "So, Mrs. Shaw, or may I say Ms. Navarro, tell me about Navarro Systems." and tell me what you need from me to be free of that. That was 3 months ago. That was the night her escape plan became a declaration of war. Henry didn't save her. He just provided the exit vehicle. She had already built the engine. Back in the present. Gregory Shaw stood on the wet pavement, a human statue of disbelief. The name Rousseau echoed in his head. Rousseau Energetics, the firm's whale, the client that paid for half the bonuses on his floor. He watched the Koenigsegg merge into traffic. He saw Arthur Klein approaching him, umbrella in hand. "Sir, are you—" "He fired me," Greg whispered. "At Per Se. 3 months ago. He fired me." "What, sir? That's impossible. We're still handling the—" Arthur stopped. "The Zurich merger. Oh my God. He didn't fire Sullivan and Cromwell. He fired you. He put you on a do not contact list. The partners. They've been handling the account without you. They sidelined you." The humiliation was a physical blow. The partners had known. They'd known he'd lost the firm's biggest client and had just worked around him. They'd let him wallow in his arrogant little divorce drama while they handled the real business. He was nothing. "And her," Greg hissed, pointing at the departed car. "What was that, Mr. Shaw?" Arthur looked deeply uncomfortable. "That mousy lawyer, Ms. Chen, I ran a final check on her after the signing. I should have done it sooner. She's not a divorce lawyer. She's the lead counsel for intellectual property at Rousseau Energetics European Division." Greg's blood ran cold. She works for him." "It appears so, sir. And that lump sum payment, the one we thought was so generous." Arthur pulled out his phone. The bank transfer just cleared. It was routed from her account as stipulated. "Good," Greg snarled. "She's already spending it." "No, sir. It was routed from her account. And to a charity. The Tucson Home for Battered Women. The entire sum. She just gave it away." Greg didn't understand. "But then she has nothing. Why would—" "Gregory?" The voice was a bark. Greg turned. Striding out of the lobby, his face a mask of thunder, was Robert Sullivan, the founding partner, the man whose name was on the door. He was flanked by 2 security guards. "Mr. Sullivan, sir, I was just—" "You're a fool, Shaw," Sullivan spat. "A blind, arrogant fool. Sir, I just got off the phone with Henry Rousseau. He called me personally, as a courtesy, to let me know that his new CTO was enjoying her first day of freedom." CTO? Greg's mind was failing to connect the dots. "Chief Technology Officer." "Yes, Shaw. And do you know who his new CTO is?" Greg's face went white. He knew. He just didn't want to believe it. "Serafina Navarro." Sullivan said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And Navarro Systems, the little AI company she've been running out of your guest room for 2 years. The one Rousseau just merged with." Sullivan shoved a tablet into Greg's chest. Greg looked down. It was a Financial Times alert which had just hit the wires from Zurich. Rousseau Energetics announces strategic merger with Navarro Systems to launch Phoenix AI, a revolution in quantum-based predictive modeling. Greg's eyes scanned the text, his vision blurring. "The deal," Sullivan said, his voice low and dangerous, "is valued at $2.8 billion. Greg dropped the tablet. It clattered on the marble floor. Billion. Your wife. Gregory, your ex-wife, is now the second largest shareholder in the combined entity and the head of all R&D. Her personal stake is estimated at just under $800 million. And you just signed a divorce decree that explicitly waives any and all claims to her past, present, and future business holdings in exchange for a one-time payment, a payment she just donated to charity." Greg's knees buckled. "She played you," Sullivan hissed. "She played all of us. And in doing so, you've made this firm look like a collective of idiots. You didn't just lose your wife, Greg. You lost the single biggest tech deal of the decade, which she built under your roof. You're a laughingstock. Mr. Sullivan, Robert, You're out. Your access is revoked. These gentlemen will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. And only those. Your partnership is dissolved. You can't, Greg shrieked, the sound high and pathetic. I built the... You built nothing, Sullivan roared, causing the entire lobby to fall silent. You were a liability we were managing. Now you're a mess we have to clean up. Get him out of my sight. The security guards took Greg by each arm. As they dragged him limp and protesting toward the service elevator, he caught the eye of the doorman, Patrick. The doorman wasn't smiling. He just watched Greg with a look of quiet, profound pity. Greg Shaw. The man who had ruled this building was dragged out the back like common trash, his own arrogant laughter still echoing in his ears. The jet was a Gulfstream G700, and it sliced through the upper atmosphere at just under the speed of sound. The silence inside the cabin was absolute, a pressurized, serene cocoon that muffled the roar of the twin Rolls-Royce engines. It was less an aircraft and more a high-tech corner office in the sky, upholstered in cream leather and brushed graphite. Serafina had changed in the private stateroom. The beige costume of Mrs. Gregory Shaw was crumpled in a bag destined for an incinerator. She now wore a sharp, comfortable-looking Acris pantsuit in a deep indigo. Her hair was down and she was sipping a cup of rare high-mountain oolong tea. She stared out the curved window, watching the New York skyline, a dark glittering scar, recede behind them. Henry sat across from her, his own laptop open. He hadn't spoken much, simply observing her with a look of profound clinical interest. He was a man who respected data and the data in front of him. This woman, who had operated under the nose of one of New York's most arrogant men for years, was the most fascinating set he'd ever encountered. So, Henry finally said, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. The taxi money. Serafina laughed. It was a real warm, unrestrained sound. It felt foreign and wonderful in her own throat. It felt appropriate, the final donation from the Gregory Shaw Charity Fund, whether he knew it or not. He knows now, Henry said. He didn't show her his phone. He simply nodded to her own, which sat on the polished table. The press release hit the wires 30 seconds after we were wheels up. I imagine your phone is... busy. She picked up the device. Her personal phone, the one Greg knew about. It was exploding. A cascade of missed calls and texts from every person she'd ever known in New York. Her old friends from the Garden Club. Reporters from the Times and the Wall Street Journal. And of course a long, scrolling, apoplectic waterfall of texts from Greg. Her finger hovered over his name. She tapped it. The screen filled with his escalating panic. Sarah. Where are you? What is this? The GM doorman said you left with Rousseau. Is this a joke? Sullivan is calling me? What the hell is going on? A merger. Navarro Systems, $800 million. Sarah, you can't do this to me. That's my money. That is marital asset. I'm calling my lawyer. We are still married. That signature is void. You lied to me. This is fraud. You will be in jail. Sarah, please, you don't understand. This is too big for you. You need me to manage this. I can protect you. I'll fire Tiffany. I swear to God. Just come back. We can have it all, you bitch. You greedy, stupid, ungrateful bitch. You ruined me. The final message had come in just 2 minutes ago. I will destroy you. Serafina read them all, her face impassive. The man who had called her weak and unstable was having a complete psychotic break, all via text. She turned the phone off and set it down, the screen going black. He'll fight it, she said, her voice quiet. It wasn't a question. He'll file a motion to vacate the judgment based on fraud. He'll claim I hid assets. He will? Henry agreed, taking a sip of water. And he will lose, spectacularly. But I did hide assets. Serafina stated, looking him in the eye. Yes, but he signed. And Ms. Chen, Henry said, his smile returning, is, as I believe you know, one of the most brilliant legal minds in Europe. While Arthur Klein was busy drafting memos about your emotional instability and your inability to manage finances, Ms. Chen was building a firewall. He leaned forward. Greg's entire case will be based on New York state law. He'll claim a right to marital assets. But here's the beauty of it, Sarah. What assets? Navarro Systems, she began. Navarro Systems was a Delaware shell company, yes, but its parent company, the entity that holds every single patent for the Phoenix Protocol, is a Swiss Société Anonyme registered in Zurich. The patents themselves were filed with the European Patent Office, not the USPTO. Henry continued, while you were depressed, you were also, according to Swiss government records, establishing a primary residence. Your household allowance for the last 6 months, Ms. Chen used it to lease a corporate apartment in Geneva in your name. Your 2 spa trips to Switzerland. You were meeting with bankers and lawyers. As of this morning, your legal residence is not New York. It's Geneva. Your U.S.-based assets at the time of signing were precisely 0. Serafina's eyes widened. She had known the plan, but hearing him lay it out so clean and sharp was staggering. He can't claim marital assets in a New York court from a Swiss resident whose entire net worth is tied up in a European corporation. He has no jurisdiction. He has no claim. The agreement he signed, the one his own lawyer drafted, explicitly waives any and all claims to your past, present, and future business holdings in exchange for that one-time payment. A payment you've already donated. He's boxed in. He has, as you so perfectly put it, nothing. Serafina let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 15 years. You thought of everything, she whispered. No, Henry said, his expression softening, his voice losing its boardroom edge. You did. You built the Phoenix Protocol. You built the legend of S. Navarro. You engineered this entire performance. You just needed a legal firewall. I just provided the bricks. He raised his glass of water in a toast. To Navarro Systems. Serafina smiled, picking up her teacup. To Phoenix AI, she corrected gently. She looked out the window at the deep dark blue of the stratosphere at the first hint of the curve of the earth. She thought of Greg standing on that wet sidewalk, his world collapsing. She thought of his laugh. She felt a brief, sharp pang. It was so intense it took her breath away. A single hot tear escaped her eye and tracked down her cheek. Henry saw it. He didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort her. He just waited, giving her the respect of her own moment. Serafina wiped it away, her hand perfectly steady. It wasn't a tear of pity. It wasn't regret. It was a tear for time. 15 years. 15 years she had let that man dim her light, convince her that her only value was as an accessory to his life. 15 years of hiding her mind. The tear was a final punctuation mark. The end of the chapter. She turned back to Henry, her eyes clear, bright, and utterly focused. The cold, brilliant mind of S. Navarro was fully in control. It's just, she said, her voice clear as a bell, I'm so ready to get to work. Henry Rousseau looked at his new chief technology officer, the most brilliant mind he had ever met, and he gave her a true unguarded smile. Welcome home, Ms. Navarro. 6 months later. The scent of stale beer and industrial disinfectant hung thick in the air. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and O'Malley's, a dim sports bar on the Upper West Side, was populated by men with nowhere else to be. Gregory Shaw was one of them. He was a ghost of the man who had signed those papers. His $3,000 Brioni suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, off-the-rack department store jacket rumpled from being slept in. His face was puffy, his eyes bloodshot. The Patek Philippe was gone, sold for pennies on the dollar to pay the first of many legal retainers. He had fought. Oh, he had fought. The moment the Financial Times article hit, he had been on the phone with Arthur Klein, screaming, threatening, demanding. He'd filed the motion to vacate the judgment, citing gross and intentional fraudulent concealment of marital assets. It had been a slaughter. Ms. Chen, no longer mousy, had appeared via video link from Zurich. She hadn't just argued, she had systematically dismantled him. She presented the Swiss residency, the European patents, the signed agreement drafted by his team that explicitly waived all claims to any past, present, and future business holdings. The judge, an experienced woman from the New York County Supreme Court, hadn't just dismissed his motion. She'd dismissed it with prejudice, meaning he could never file it again. She had in her ruling called his legal action frivolous, vindictive, and a profound waste of the court's time. The humiliation was total. Sullivan and Cromwell had disbarred him for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty to the firm. The penthouse was gone, seized by creditors, who it turned out held liens on nearly everything Greg owned. Tiffany had vanished the moment the Amex Black Card was declined. He was toxic. Now he nursed a warm Coors Light, his eyes staring blankly at an old baseball game on one of the many screens. He glanced up at the one TV that wasn't playing sports. It was CNBC broadcasting live. The chyron read, "Live from Davos, the future of AI." And there she was. Gregory froze his glass halfway to his lips. It was Serafina. But it was not his Serafina. This woman was luminous. She wore a striking deep blue Roland Mouret dress that was both powerful and elegant. Her dark hair was no longer in a severe drab bun. It was cut in a sharp modern bob that framed her face. Her eyes, which he had mistaken for dull, were bright, alive, and fiercely intelligent. She was on a panel seated between the CEO of a German tech giant and a U.S. cabinet secretary. She was not, as Gregory had always insisted, letting the men talk. She was commanding the conversation. The model isn't just predictive. She was saying, her voice crisp and passionate, her hands moving to emphasize her point. It's prescriptive. Anyone can build an algorithm to see a problem. Phoenix AI anticipates the cascading failures. When the Texas grid was 90 seconds from a multi-state collapse last month, it didn't just sound an alarm. It actively rerouted 10 gigawatts of power through 3 separate secured subgrids. It's not analysis, it's a solution. The anchor, a man Greg recognized as a major financial media figure, turned to her, his expression one of clear admiration. "Ms. Navarro, you are the story of the decade. 6 months ago, no one knew your name. Now you're the architect of the new energy revolution. What's your secret?" Serafina smiled, a calm, camera-ready, billion-dollar smile. "There's no secret," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet, dirty bar. "I just finally stopped letting someone else write my story. I decided to pick up the pen myself." The camera panned slightly. Beside her, just out of the main shot, sat Henry Rousseau. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't looking at the moderator. He was looking at Serafina. And on his face, a man notorious for his cold, unreadable expression, was a look of pure, unadulterated admiration. In the bar, Greg stared at the screen. He saw the woman he had called weak, the woman he had called unstable, the woman he had called stupid, the woman he had laughed at. He didn't hear the TV anymore. All he could hear echoing in his own skull was his own voice from that 50th floor conference room. That dry, arrogant, dismissive laugh. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Serafina." A wordless animal sound of pure, unadulterated rage tore itself from his throat. He roared and hurled his glass at the television. The glass shattered against the screen right on Serafina's smiling, triumphant face. The image flickered and went dark. The bar went silent. Every eye turned to him. The bartender, a burly man with a thick neck, pointed a beefy finger. "Out! Get out! Now!" Gregory was grabbed by the arm and shoved bodily out the door. He stumbled, falling hard onto the cold, dirty sidewalk of Amsterdam Avenue. He was left alone in the gray afternoon with nothing but the ringing in his ears, the smell of garbage from a nearby alley, and the ghost of his own stupid, arrogant laughter. And just like that, Serafina Navarro proved that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's thriving beyond your oppressor's wildest imagination. Gregory Shaw thought he was closing a book, but he just set her free to write an epic. Her story is a powerful reminder never ever underestimate the person sitting quietly next to you. They might not just be in a different chapter. They might be writing a completely different and far more brilliant book. What did you think of Serafina's incredible comeback? Was Greg's downfall satisfying enough? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. And if you love stories of ultimate revenge and empowerment, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear it and smash that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss a single story we have for you.